Hey, so welcome to your multi-dimensional array tutorial. Keep in mind this is an extension of our array and array list unit. We're going to look at multi-dimensional arrays because they're useful. They're pretty cool, and they're a little bit more advanced than your standard array stuff, which you guys have been working with since your intro class. But also keep in mind that multi-dimensional arrays won't show up on the AP exam that you'll be taking. So um, they also won't show up on your unit exam either. So this is strictly for your second project in this unit and for fun, which is good because that's fun. All right, so we're going to take the Mario grid problem from our last test. If you remember, there was a question that asked you to write a function called createGrid that took a length and a width and outputted the blocks that would appear in that size structure in the Super Mario Brothers game. And most of you did that sort of like this. You created a for loop for int I is 0, I is less than the, let's say, probably width and height. How about that? Int height. So I is less than the value of height. Add 1 to I each time. And then most of you had another for loop inside. Int j is 0. J is less than the width. Add 1 to j each time. So you had a string for the row. You added a pound sign to the row each time, and then after the inner loop you did a system.out.println. You printed that row on a new line each time. All right, so let's pretend that we called this function, and we called it here createGrid with a height of 4 and a width of 6. So if we ran this, we should get a 4x6 grid, which we certainly do, of values. So this is a good problem to start with because it'll give us a way to explore a multi-dimensional array. And the reason why you need to know this is because multi-dimensional arrays are how every data table kind of in the universe is stored. If you look at this grid, instead of kind of in this lens where we did two separate for loops for the height and the width, you could instead look at it as an array of length 4, where each item in the array is this string. Now pretend for a second that it's not a data type as simple as a string. Pretend for a second instead of 5 hash marks you have, 6 hash marks, you have 6 separate strings that need to be stored here. Let's say a username, a password, a social security number, a credit card, maybe like our last project. You can quickly see why using multi-dimensional arrays for data tables is really very powerful and useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our createGrid function, and instead of just printing out the rows, we're going to ask it to create a multi-dimensional array that stores this value as well, and we'll have it print that just to see. All right, so how do we do this? So the first thing we need to do is we're going to create an array that's going to hold the information. Okay, and we'll create an array, and what we know is that that array, not var, excuse me, it should be array. It should be string array. We'll say grid equals new array, and the size of it should be, looks like the height. New array with size. Oh, and I have to import the import java.util.array. Maybe it's arrays. There we go. It doesn't like this. New array of strings. Good. Okay, so the string array grid is going to be a new array of strings with the size of height. So right now it knows that we're going to create a new array with the size of whatever height is passed into this function. Now that's not quite going to cut it for a multidimensional array though, because, well, it'll tell it how many items to have in the higher level array, but it won't tell it how many items to have in the each element here. Okay, so what we do is we give it another set of braces. So string array grid is going to be a multi-dimensional array that's going to have the first size be height and the second size be width. So what this does is it says that grid is now a multi-dimensional array, a two-dimensional array. Yes, you can have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-dimensional arrays. You absolutely can. It's going to be a two-dimensional array where the enclosing array's length is the length of the height, and each individual item is going to have an array length of width. Pretty neat. All right, so how do we set items in here? Well, we have two for loops that kind of go on, where we loop through the height and we loop through the width, and then we add this hash mark to the row and then print out the row. But instead what we could do is we can set I as height, j as width, equal to be a hash mark. Oops, not string, grid. Okay, so what this does is this sets the value of grid in the first element in the enclosing array, and then it takes the j letter of the inner array. So it takes the I element of the enclosing array and the j element of the inner array. Okay, it's kind of like saying, hey, I want to set the first, I want to set the first array's first value equal to a hash mark. I want to set the first array's second value equal to a hash mark. Okay, that's the notation for setting the values of multi-dimensional arrays. You take highest level, second highest level. Okay, so let's see if we do this, and then we also print out at the very end system.out.println. We print out grid. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, looks like we can't do that. I'm not really sure how you'd print out it. You know, if grid was just a simple or a single array, this would work. For example, if we just change it to be like this, this would probably work. No, it would not work. Interesting. Well, there must be a way to print out the, maybe it's string dot value of grid. Can you do that? No, can't do that apparently. All right, hold on, I gotta look it up because I want to see what this looks like, and I forgot how to do it. Is have this toString method that you could print it out to. Unfortunately, for multi-dimensional arrays, it prints, since it's an array of arrays, it prints out the representation of each array object. So we could do this. I mean, it's not going to be so useful for us. We could say system.out.println, and we could say grid at I, and that would, see, that would do it intermittently. But we want to figure out a way to print out the whole thing at the end. So we could kind of do, you know, an enhanced for loop. We could say for array A. I think that's the enhanced one, isn't it? Whoops. In grid. Not quite. I just did this. For string array. There you go. We could say system.out.println arrays.toString a, and that would at the end give us a nice printout right here. Okay, so that's pretty neat. And this is really pretty useful. So let's take it a step further. Instead of creating a grid of blocks like we would use in, let's say, Mario World, let's also write a method that's going to take a specific element. Nah, that's not too much fun. Let's also write a method that's going to remove a whole row of that array. So is it possible to, I don't know, remove a whole row? Nah, that seems too easy. All right, I got it. We're going to take a method that's going to take the first value in one of these, so the first value in each row here, and calculate its average. So instead of strings, we're going to need to make it a multi-dimensional array of integers, because we want to do some math. And instead of setting this equal there, we'll have it be we'll have it set it equal to j times I, whatever that is. There we go. Okay, so I've created a multi-dimensional array of ints. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to write a little bit of code that's going to calculate the average of the first value in here. And you can see why that's useful, right? If you have to calculate the average in an Excel spreadsheet, that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking a data table, it's getting the first value of each entry and doing the average, right? So let's go ahead and do it. So we need to write a for loop that loops through each thing. We'll say for int array in grid. Okay. So that's each row. We need to say that we need to make a variable for sum. We'll say the sum is an integer. So int sum starts at 0. We're going to say sum is equal to the result of what happens when you take sum and you add to it the first value in A. Okay, so notice what we're doing here is the same thing as saying grid 0, 0 plus grid 1, 0 plus grid 2, 0. See, we're doing the same thing as that. We're just looping through the items in this two-dimensional array. So sum plus equals A0, that's sum. And then at the end of it, we want to calculate the average. So we'd probably have to do double equals, double average. We're going to need to probably cast this as a double, since we're trying to do ints, because we're dividing ints, so we want to cast it as a double, and we want to say the average is going to be sum divided by, now how do we do length here? What's the length of grid? Think about it for a second. Okay, is it the length of the inner elements or the length of the outer array? Okay, sure enough, it is the length of the outer array. Okay, so if we do sum grid length, and let's see, we call this with height of 4, width of 6, that's going to give us, we set it equal to 0, that's always going to be the first one. Okay, so it's going to be j times I, so that'll be 1 times 0, 1 times 1, 1 times 2, 1 times 3. So that's 6 divided by 4. Let's see if it's right. We have to print out this. Yeah, 6 divided by 4 is 1.5. So when we just type in grid.length, we're getting the length of the enclosing array. How could we get the length of an inner array? Let's pretend you didn't want to divide it by the number of rows, you wanted to divide it by the number of columns. Okay, you could just reference the length of that first array. So the difference between grid at 0 dot length is that's getting the length of this, whereas grid dot length is getting the number of these you have. Right, so if we did grid at 0 dot length, we're going to have 6 divided by 6. We're going to get 1. Sure enough, we do. Okay, so that's an important distinction. Right. Now, last question. A lot of people ask, can you do multi-dimensional array lists? The answer is yes, you can. But for our sake, we're going to stick to multi-dimensional arrays because the array list can get kind of complicated and annoying, and if you have to use a multi-dimensional array list, you're better off creating a model object and then having the array list be of those objects. So that's going to about do it, and see you next time.